Hi friends. What all things you see when you look at an individual? So when you see somebody, immediately how do you make an assessment of the other person? So most of us may not be thinking about that when you see somebody, but what we have to know is that there is a long process of assessment and evaluation going in each individual when they meet the other person. What immediately happens is a emotional reaction. Your emotional reaction in fact comes before your intelligence or thought process. So the natural emotional reaction is protective for this animal, that is this individual. And so it's natural for somebody to feel angry about somebody who is angry at him, and loving or compassionate or sympathetic towards somebody else depends on the immediate emotions that's conveyed by the other person to this individual, or you are in fact having immediately getting a reflection of the other person's emotion, and also the other person is creating a reflection of your emotion, or your emotions are getting reflected in the other individual, and the other individual's emotions are getting reflected in you. And so this is happening in the immediate period when you happen to see somebody or interact with somebody. Just following that, there is a thought process. There is a thought process, and the thought process definitely can modify what is happening in interpersonal interactions to follow after that. So this emotional reaction, which is very immediate, is in fact protective for the individual, and this emotional reaction is preparing the organism to meet the demands of the environment. And in this background, knowing this, so we have to know what are things that we see when we look at an individual. When you look at an individual, so usually what we see immediately is the external attributes. Okay, his age, his appearance, the way he dress, the way he move, his facial expression. So this is giving so much of information because we have a lot of experience all throughout life. We were experiencing different, interacting with different type of people, human beings, and situations, and it has formed impressions in our mind which we are not aware of all the time. But the moment you see somebody, this reflection is coming to you and helping you to assess the individual. So the external attributes can be modified, or you can put, or any individual can put an external appearance that is to some extent may be deceptive, that may not be giving out his exact thought process or the individual that he is. So if you happen to know the individual more, so you will definitely will be looking into or experiencing the other person's thought process, or understanding his thought process, or emotional world, or the way he perceives the world, that is his perception of the world. And meanwhile the other person also will be knowing about your inner personal world, or your perception of the world, that is the psychological dimension. And then we will know gradually about his social concepts, or how he is imbibing the society into him, how that is the social dimension, that is a social dimension. And people say even there is a spiritual dimension. So when, if you happen to have a deep look at somebody, so more than the external physical attributes, the money or the job or the work he is doing, or so these are the dress, the external superficial approaches and behavior, and deeper than these external attributes there is a psychological dimension, and still deeper there is a social dimension, and even still deeper there is a spiritual dimension. So if you look at an individual, to understand him completely fully, you have to know not only the physical attributes but the psychological, social, and the spiritual qualities that is so individualistic for all individuals. For everybody, there is a very individualized individualized dimension of psychological, social, and spiritual aspects of life. So this is one way of looking at an individual. So there is another way of looking at an individual, and when you see somebody, so you have to know that that individual, so you are seeing or sitting before you, is an individual with the all past experience, his experiences, all his life, from birth through different stages of life up to this particular point of life. So all the past experiences, good and bad, were contributing to shaping to this individual up to the present state. And that person, naturally, like all living creatures, is having a basic encoded unfolding code of life, which is determined by the genetic makeup of the individual. So each individual is having a genetic makeup which is written in each and every cell of that organism, which from birth to death, which is getting unfolded. It is definitely influenced by nature and by experience the individual was having all throughout life, that person's life, all good and bad things that was happening in that person's life all throughout is in fact shaping this individual. So there is a basic genetic determinant, and there is environmental interaction which is shaping the individual. All his good and bad experiences are shaping all his memories, pains, hopes, everything is there, and this is making the individual who is sitting before you. So when you look at somebody, you can see all the past experiences that was happening to the individual, which is making the person sitting before you at that particular moment. And so all the past you can know when you look at somebody, because it's definitely having its scars and marks on each individuals. And then what the individual is doing now, what all are the important individuals in that person's life, what all are the important activities that he is doing now, and how he perceives the world now, what is the shape of his perception, his thinking, and his emotional state, and his demands. So these are the immediate assessments or evaluation the individual is having, which is shaping the individual's behavior now, cross-sectionally present. So you have to know the past, the present, and also you have to know the future. So when you look at somebody, you have to know the future, where this individual is going, what all are his hopes and expectations and fears and plans for future, what he is going to do in his life, and how it's all going to end. So when you look at somebody, so apart from the first method of looking at somebody, so what we were discussing now is that you can see the past, all the past events that was happening in the individual's life, shaping that individual up to the present state, and the present situation, evaluation, approach, perception, assessment, nature of assessment of the individual, which is describing the present state and all his future aspirations and fears, and where he is going, and understanding is about. So the past, the present, and future of the individual sitting before you. So you can look at that individual in that particular way. So you can see, when you look at an individual in his physical, external, material attributes, then the psychological dimension, the social dimension, and the spiritual dimension, and longitudinally, when you can know about the past of the individual, the present of the individual, and the future of the individual. So there is still another way of looking at an individual, how to look at an individual, or what all things you can know when you see somebody or when you interact somebody, or knowingly or unknowingly, what all things are passing through our mind when you happen to see somebody. So this is the approach, a third type of approach or an event that's happening in us all the time when we interact with somebody or when we see somebody, is described in the narrative therapy approach. So each individual's life can be taken as a narrative, because all the past events that's happening in a person's life, when you look back, each individual is giving a narrative for that. That's why the autobiographies are very interesting. So if you read a good number of autobiographies, it's not simply about truth, or it's very difficult to say that truth is such a stable, stationary thing, the same for everybody. Truth is in fact a person's interpretation. That is his truth. So in autobiographies, what they are doing is they are describing their past, their experiences, and the people they happen to interact with in their own perception. So it is their narrative. So an autobiography is a narrative of the individual about his life. So this narrative, whether you are writing an autobiography or not writing an autobiography, every individual is having a narrative of his life. So, if you know the narrative, so how will you know the narrative of another individual? If you want to know the narrative of the other individual, you have to be a good listener. Okay, when you talk to the individual, you listen what he is saying, because he is always giving his narrative. So if you watch human interactions, or people talk in group, or two individuals or three individuals, when they are having a conversation, or a light conversation, when they are together, when you look at that deeply, you can understand that each individual in most situations is trying to tell their own views of the world, or they are giving their own narrative. So this type of approach you can see in literature as well. If people are using, so this is beautifully described. This approach is beautifully adopted in novel by famous writer Orhan Pamuk. In Orhan Pamuk's books, you can see the often different characters. Imagine that five individuals are sitting in a room. They are coming from different background. They are friends, and they are talking, and they are leaving the room. And the same situation is described by each individual. Orhan Pamuk has that the ability to describe the same situation described by each individuals who were participating in the conversation. So it's all painting a different picture. So what was the truth? What was the truth? So there is no true description of what was happening in a room. So because if four or five individuals were in the room talking among themselves about different subjects, and they were going away, each individual is having a different view of the situation. So what is truth, what is no, so you can say that it's all true. It's all true. Each individual's view is true, because it is about the narrative. And same type of an approach is taken by a writer by name Benjamin in his novel Manjaveyil Maranangal. It's Malayalam, Manjaveyil Maranangal. So in that book, I think he is somehow adopting or he himself was using this type of a technique. I was seen being used by writers like Orhan Pamuk, where he is trying to describe the same situation in the eyes of different individuals who happen to witness the same situation. So I was describing these two situations just to know what the narrative approach is. So a person's life is narrative. So if again this will help you. So if you are a doctor or a therapist, it will definitely help you to look at an individual. So I always used to say that when you see somebody with a depressive disorder, or somebody with schizophrenia, or somebody with obsessive compulsive disorder, or whatever, or any kind of behavioral change, instead of looking at the, or any physical illness, just so instead of looking at the pathology or the illness, just concentrate on the individual. You have to know that it is an individual with an illness. It is an individual, a person with depressive disorder. It's an individual with, say, schizophrenia, or an individual with, say, obsessive compulsive disorder. So when you talk to the individual, always try to look at the individual, not at the pathology. Not at the pathology. So in the same way, you have to know that there is an individual and there is a person who is having different experiences in life, and he is looking back at these experiences and is describing that, and is giving a narrative. So each individual's life is seen by themselves as a narrative given by that person about all the events that was happening in that person's life. So this is the thing that we have to know. So is it possible for you to change the narrative, or if is it possible for you to make the individual change the narrative of his life? So you can look at even different psychopathology or even pathological approaches of life, or behaviors that's not comforting to oneself or causing difficulties for others, especially in different type of interpersonal difficulties that people experience in family situations and outside. Is it possible for you to change your narrative, or is it possible for you to help a client to change his narrative of the life that he was experiencing? That is the basis of what we call as a narrative therapy. Narrative therapy. Here, what we are doing is, so you have to listen to the individual, and you have to know what is the narrative that he was giving to his life. And if that narrative can be shaped into a more healthy approach, where he are seeing the difficulties or the bad experiences or the good experiences or the different type of physical illnesses or medical conditions or psychological conditions that the individual had to experience all throughout life, if that individual is looking at these experiences are separate from his own person, if he is seeing it separate from his own person as something that was happening to him. Imagine that somebody is having depressive disorder. So if you are seeing that individual, or if the individual is able to look at that as a depressive disorder happening to me, or a bad event that was happening to me, it is as if separating you from the difficult situation that you had to face. And this kind of a separation is possible by by making him describe, or making or understanding the views. So it's instead of taking this as an individual defect, an illness that we happen to unfortunately get, or a difficult life situation that we had to face unfortunately, which was having a bad effect on us, instead of thinking of it as something happening to me, you can separate it from the person, and you can say that incident, okay, it was bad or painful, okay, but it was happening on to this person, and this person, it's not the person that's in fact causing it or suffering it, but it was happening from outside. So to some extent, the individual for the individual, it's possible to see something that was happening to him as separate from his own person, So narrative therapy, so this is another view of looking at people and understanding people. So if you can see the individual and the difficulties that was happening, the good or bad things that was happening to individuals as separate from him, or as a narrative, so you can see the person better. And especially it's going to help the individual to have a changed narrative, which is going to be a more healthy narrative. So it's not like looking for an absolute truth. So it is about looking for the truthful narrative, and it's about changing the narrative. So we were discussing the different methods of looking at an individual just by seeing an individual, looking at the external attributes, then going for the psychological, social, spiritual dimension. That's one way of looking at it. Then the past, all the past that was happening to the individual, the present and the future where he is going, and all the things. So as a continuum from from birth to death. So when you see somebody, you can know everything that was happening to the individual from birth to death. And another way of the third method we describe is the narrative way. So what was happening to him and the way he is viewing the world now, and hopes and expectations about future as a narrative. So even a fourth method of looking at an individual is again describing what you call the life tree approach. Life tree approach. The tree, again, it is described in different religious thoughts and philosophical thinkings. It's all described in different interesting methods. Interesting methods. A tree, so it has its root, its stem, its branches and leaves. So you can think about a life tree. So if you are considering yourself, comparing yourself to a tree, you are drawing your strength through roots from different connections. So there are a lot of important individuals all throughout your life. When you are very young, you are taken care of by your parents, close relatives, your teachers, and all the good people doing all kind of good things for you. So they may not be there alive now, but you are drawing strength from these roots. So if you are drawing your life like a tree, when you draw the roots, so you can mark all the important people, so you can remember who were there around your early days as you were growing up, helped you all along. You can mark their names, because these are the roots from where you are drawing the strength. And the stem, about the important people in your life now. There are so many important activities, occupations, interests, hobbies, leisure activities, work, satisfaction from work, important people in your life, so many people with whom you are in touch with, your friends, your relatives, family, immediate family, wife, children, relatives. So that circle is helping you now. So who all are those important people or situations or activities that is going to helping you now? That is forming the stem. And again, the future, what all things you want to do in future, from where you are drawing the light, where you are processing that life strength like the leaves of the tree, that's helping you to sustain yourself. What all things you want to do in future, all the good things that you have, all the good people that you want to meet, how you want to keep your interactions healthy, can be marked in the branch and leaves of the tree. So you can look at somebody comparing that person to a tree, like the roots from where this person was drawing his strength, the stem and the branches are the immediate relationship, people, activities that is keeping this individual alive and healthy, and the leaves from where you get the light, the aspirations for future, from where you get the light and the strength of life. So I was describing these different ways of looking at an individual. Thank you for the patient listening. Thank you.